But before all that, I'm joined on the line by retired Colonel John Banks, who's been around the world in the army and now speaking out about Syria and Ukraine, amongst other things. Hi, John. Welcome to the Politics Show.
Good evening, Tony.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you first, and when did you first join the army?
Many years ago, in 1962, I joined the Parachute Regiment, went to Pathfinders, then went on to work with Her Majesty's government in various other areas, and the old special branch in SO15. Was headhunted by the Americans and went across to the States and worked with one of their agencies in Honduras, also in a few countries in Africa. Then went to DEA, where I operated mainly against the people I've been working with in the CIA.
That's interesting. That's the Drug Enforcement Agency. Tell us about the counterpoint between those two organisations, because it must have been really interesting having been on both sides of that.
Well, the reason I left the agency was because of the narcotic smuggling that was going on with Ollie North down in Honduras. Also the heroin that was coming in via Afghanistan on the swaps for the Stinger and the Red Eyes and American weapons going to the Mujahideen. Heroin was coming back the other way. I resigned and went to DEA and was stationed in New York but travelling the world. There is an article in Whiteout CIA Drugs in the Press by Alexander Coburn reference this, and I just couldn't. Operations are one thing, but massive drug smuggling is another, and it's still going on today. There's absolutely no doubts about it.
Now, you mentioned Oliver North there. He was pardoned, wasn't he, by George Bush Sr. But what did you learn about his operations, and what was the purpose of them? And must have been quite interesting to get to know.
Basically, they were bringing in major amounts of. Congress and the Senate had stopped all funding for the Contras. Then we had the Bakr Valley hostage release situation, where Oliver North was involved in that and shipping weapons to Iran, breaking sanctions with George Bush's permission. But the cocaine was coming in. The agency set up crack laboratories in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, and were literally flooding the streets with cocaine, crack cocaine. The money then was supposedly going back to the Contras. How much it ended up in private pockets, we don't know, but it was supposedly going back to the Contras. North had very strong ties with Gacha and another senior cartel member called the Cowboy, was nicknamed the Cowboy, the Mexican. And it was a major drug smuggling operation run by the US government for black money for black operations.
Yeah, but you see, what you're painting here is a picture of one arm of the US government not knowing what the other arm of the US government is doing, because one arm's doing this drug running on an enormous scale and the other arm is trying to prosecute it.
Well, it wasn't trying to prosecute it, it was trying to prevent it, and when eventually they did bring indictments against various people, none of the agency people, Oliver North walked clear and free because of pardons from George Bush. If you look carefully at a name called Monzar al-Qassar, he was a Syrian, was involved with George Bush and also Oliver North regarding the Bakr Valley, and also assisting on getting weapons into Iran for the Bush and North conglomerate.
So how close were you actually to the drugs themselves? Were you actually flying these drugs? How close? Were you guarding them or what?
I wasn't flying them. I actually found out about it one day on a landing strip where a C-130 came in and trucks pulled up and started loading bales on it. And I said to Colonel North, excuse me, what's in the bales? And he said, it's medical supplies. I said, can anyone tell me why medical supplies are being shipped back to America from a combat zone? And they just laughed. So I pulled my knife and went across, slashed the bundle, and there was cocaine.
So where was this and when? What roughly? What year and which country?
This was mid-80s, about 85, 86.
And in which country, John?
Honduras.
So that must have had a pretty powerful effect on you. What did you do then?
I didn't say too much there and then because I wouldn't have left the area, but that night left, went across to an airport, got a flight out, and ended up back in Washington, D.C., where I made a full report. Resigned from the agency and joined DEA.
And so the DEA were trying to prevent it, but they didn't really manage to do that, did they?
They weren't getting the backup to do it. It was exactly the same if you ever read the Clinton or watch the Clinton Chronicles regarding Mena Airport, where DEA agents were ordered to back off and go away from there. This was during Clinton's term as governor of Arkansas.
So what was happening at Mena Air Base then? Because, like you say,
well, it
Bill Clinton,
base,
wasn't it?
Private airport, small one in Arkansas, where flights were coming in delivering cocaine. Federal agents attempted to get it prevented and were ordered to stay away by Washington. The Attorney General of Arkansas had to leave Arkansas. She was a female, because literally they were trying to arrest her in Arkansas and shut her up because she was running an investigation into it with state troopers and state investigators. But once again, that was Barry Seal was the main runner in there. So the whole thing was once again multiple consignments of narcotics, of cocaine coming into Mena and being distributed out.
I mean, if it's not a proper US military airbase, surely anybody could see that the drug running operation was going on. I mean, this is just an ordinary airstrip.
They could see planes landing, certainly, and they could see cargoes being unloaded, but they couldn't get into the airport.
Okay. Who was this guy Barry Seal then? Because I've heard about him before. If you could just give us a bit of his background.
Hired pilot flying cocaine into the US.
And so was he just a sort of freelance agent, or who was he working for?
He was a contractor for the CIA.
Look, you're painting a picture here of these intelligence services, which are part of the government, being the world's biggest drug runners, John.
CIA are the world's biggest drug dealers.
And are you saying that the British don't get involved in this? We keep our hands clean?
No, I'm not saying that in the slightest. British are doing any smuggling of narcotics because I don't know anything about the British part of it. All I know is they certainly know it's the agency is involved in it, or MI6 certainly know the agency is involved in it. They certainly do absolutely nothing to stop it. The 180 kilograms that was arrested at Heathrow Airport 2009 was part of an operation, 180 kilograms of heroin and a further 80 kilograms seized in Kent. That was part of a CIA operation in conjunction with ISI agents.
So that's the Pakistani secret, is it? Which
Pakistani
secret service is that?
Yeah,
okay. You've had a really interesting experience in these various outfits. Just run through some of the different. I mean, you've already mentioned the Central Intelligence Agency. We've mentioned briefly bits of the British Army and the Drug Enforcement Agency. Who have you actually been working for over the years?
Over the years? Well, my last and probably most enlightening experience was with the Director of Special Operations in South Africa, which lasted from 93 up until 2009. DSO was a unit that was formed by Nelson Mandela on his release from prison. It was part of the National Prosecuting Authority, nothing to do with the South African Police Service whatsoever. In fact, at loggerheads with the South African Police Service. It was an intelligence gathering unit responsible only to the President and the Minister of Safety and Security. And one thing our unit didn't like was interference from outside agencies, i.e. the Americans, the British, French, anyone. We would liaise with them where it concerned the things in their areas of interest, but we didn't like the interference from them. Operations were conducted against terrorist groups operating and seeking sanctuary in South Africa. But it must be remembered that the ANC was favourable to some of these groups simply because during the days of apartheid, when the British and Americans and the French and everyone had deserted the ANC to go with apartheid, they were supported by some of the radical Muslim groups. So they had to return the favour to a degree. They would not allow operations to be carried out on their areas, but they would allow political discussions or anything else.
You said it was particularly enlightening working in South Africa. Why was that?
To watch the machinations of the various agencies all competing with each other. South Africa's a very strategic location. It's on the Horn of Africa. It's where the Atlantic joins the Indian Ocean, so it's strategic in that thing. It's the most stable country in Africa. Therefore, it's a good jumping-off point to other areas. It's very interesting watching everybody playing their games.
So what did it teach you then about your understanding now you're retired, of how the world really works?
Well, Tony, you hit quite a few strong points here. The war on terror, you've also said things about the war on terror. The war on terror is a sham, and the war on drugs is a sham. The war on terror, in 5-6 years ago, I said to someone that al-Baghdadi was the leader of ISIS, was a CIA operative, or was released from Camp Bakr and was then sent to Israel via Erbil. He was flown up to Erbil by helicopter and in a Black Ops plane flew down to Tel Aviv where he was trained. Returned back into Syria over the Golan Heights, where it joins up, where Israel's got the occupied part. Al-Baghdadi was, and I would imagine is still, a CIA asset, absolutely no doubt. The funding, the weapons, the recruits being Saudi criminals released from prison. He was there initially to stop Assad to take on Syria. Syria is a thorn in America's side, it's a thorn in Israel's side, it's a thorn in Saudi Arabia's side, and they wanted it taken out. Everybody was saying they couldn't go to open war, so they were bringing in ISIS and other groups to destabilise and overthrow Syria. The problem was it got totally out of hand. But it's created a war on terror. The war on terror is the biggest money earner in the world today. It's overtaken narcotics for its money-earning capabilities.
So who's it making money for?
Sorry?
Who's it making money for?
There are 2,700 and something private contractor companies within the United States on contract to NSA and the CIA. There are other agencies, other people who own agencies that are involved with the government. It is earning absolute fortunes, the war on terror. It's also enabling the total clampdown on everybody, and our personal rights, our personal freedoms have all gone out the window, as easy as that. Every time I fly into the States now, where my family are at the moment, I'm held for 11, 12 hours at the immigration. They have to let me through. I've done nothing wrong, but I'm held. That's my personal freedoms have gone.
So, most of us, we do we just recently had a general election here. We've elected a new government. I mean, surely these are the people who are actually holding the purse strings, and that's what's important, is the government is spending our taxpayers' money on various things, and the politicians, we're electing to do that for us.
Well, put it this way, Tony, did we elect them? I mean, they only got 33% of the votes. Was that a representation of the British way of thinking? You know, the politicians forget one thing. They are voted in by the public. They are paid by the public to do what is best in the public's interest. Otherwise, like any other employee, they can be sacked, voted out. But it's now becoming a situation where once they're in, they immediately forget what they're in for. It's a club now, a money-earning club. There's no doubts about it. If we take Blair, just Blair, for example, during his tenure as Prime Minister, he stopped the Al Jameer bribe scandal with BAE. He was implicated in bribes with BAE into South Africa on the arms scandal there, and into Tanzania, and into Botswana. BAE sold Tanzania and Botswana military takeoff and landing radar for their aircraft, but Botswana and Tanzania do not have air forces, military air forces. But Blair had overseen the deals. He ordered the Serious Fraud Agency in England to stop all investigations into the BAE scandals. So now we have prime ministers who are working to their own agendas rather than what's in the interest of the public.
When you were down, I mean, one of the things we've discussed is the murky shenanigans behind the disappearance of the South African nuclear weapons after Black Majority Rule came in. I just wondered if you've got any take on what happened to those, having worked down in South Africa.
A lot of the technology went to Pakistan. Those gentlemen worked for the South African Reserve Bank, the equivalent of their federal bank. John J. Hobbs was a very, very senior member who organised the deal between Pakistan and Palabora nuclear research facility, where a lot of the things went from, in the closing days of apartheid South Africa, a lot of the information went out of South Africa to Pakistan.
Now, you've talked about Syria there in quite a lot of detail about how it certainly appears that the CIA is actually managing, running, supplying, etc. ISIS. But you know, we're hearing day after day that they're actually bombing ISIS, John.
Tony, they're bombing. The Turks are bombing the PKK and missing ISIS. Weapons nowadays are pinpoint. If they decided they didn't like you enough, Tony, they could pinpoint your house and drop a bomb down your chimney if you've got a chimney. There's absolutely no doubts. 90% of these airstrikes, oh yes, they do hit, now and again hit ISIS, but 90% hit empty desert, empty buildings. If you look at the casualty list of ISIS in in nearly 1 year of attack, the casualty list is not very high. We have convoys trundling up and down Iraqi roads and Syrian roads. Spies in the sky are watching that area every day. They could call in airstrikes with no problems whatsoever on those convoys. We have the town of Mosul with a luxury hotel now belonging to ISIS, where all the ISIS commanders are on regular basis, and ISIS guests are there. Why don't they airstrike the hotel? Why don't they airstrike the barracks or the tank compounds or where the weapon arsenals are? It's a farce. It's costing The US government, 470 million a day. I don't know what it's costing the British government, because officially we're not striking into Syria, although that's just come out that we are, with embedded pilots. So it is a farce. It's for people with brains to look into it and say what is happening. You realise that there is no concerted effort against ISIS. There's a concerted effort to remove Assad, and they're very sorry every time one of their missiles misses ISIS and hits the Syrian Arab army. But it's crazy.
Also, I mean, there's two major ways that ISIS are getting finance, and I mean, let's just leave aside whether you can close their bank accounts down. I mean, which would seem to me to be rather a simple thing to do. But I mean, they're getting money from drug running. They're also getting money from selling oil. Wouldn't it be fairly simple to close that operation down?
It'd be very simple to close the operation down. Put it this way, Tony: if a super tanker, loads up in one of the ports in Iraq, it's spotted by, in the control of ISIS, it's spotted by satellites, obviously, because they're zooming over that area all the time. So why doesn't the US Navy arrest it when it puts to sea? Why, how are the people who are buying the oil paying for the oil? They don't airdrop crates with $100 bills in them. It has to go into a bank account. You know, follow the money. The old story in any kind of terrorism or narcotics, follow the money. It can't be hard to do. We're talking millions and millions of dollars per day.
Well, we had Scott Bennett on here from the United States who'd been doing exactly that, and then was put in jail on trumped-up charges because he discovered that this money was being funneled through Swiss bank accounts, UBS Bank in Switzerland. But anyway, let's just move.
Have you looked at the last year? There were 68 suicides of very senior bankers. In fact, a group of us started to call them the swingers, jumpers and shooters. Jumping off the top of high-rise bank buildings, hanging themselves in their garages or in their houses. One guy shoots his dog, his kids, and then himself. One guy runs down an embankment and jumps in front of a train. They picked extremely painful ways of killing themselves. But 68 in a period, I think it was 9 months.
So what are you saying there? You think that maybe these people have been bumped off?
I would say they've been, they knew too much for their own good, put it that way.
What about Ukraine? Because this is where the focus shifted northwards after the British Parliament 2 summers ago blocked the open assault on Syria. What do you make of what's transpired there? Because there was allegations, anyway, last February that what happened in the Maidan Square was effectively a kind of coup.
It was a coup d'etat, absolutely no doubts about it. It had every ingredient for calling it a coup d'etat. Blackwater was involved, and, well, not Blackwater in its current name, or in its current name of Aegis, were involved, absolutely no doubt. The sniping was done by highly trained snipers on the Maidan Square affair. McCain's down there just prior to the Maidan affair. Victoria Nuland is telling the EU if the EU doesn't like it, it can, she used
go away. Yes, away. She said said in uncertain terms. Yeah.
It was a coup d'etat, absolutely no doubts about it, and Russia has every right. I think Russia's been. I'm not a pro-Russia man, but I believe Russia has been extremely restrained, and Putin's been very restrained. For a simple fact, when the USSR folded up, there was an agreement, no NATO weaponry in the bordering states of Russia. Now America's pouring them into Poland, it's pouring them in right away round Romania. You've got the American Army doing its Operation Dragoon, where it drove down the 6 bordering states of Russia on Russian borders.
They're also putting troops, a lot of troops, into the Baltic states, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean it's pure aggression, or it's like baiting a bull, and eventually the bull's going to stick his head down and give you a butt in the bum, so to speak.
What are your thoughts about allegations that the Russians have actually made most of the running in Novorossiya, in Donetsk?
No, I don't believe it. I do not believe it. We've got the people in Donetsk and around that area are East Ukrainians. They speak Russian. They've got more linkage to the Russians than to the Ukrainians. But I do not think the Russians put troops in the slightest. I do not think they shot down MH17. There's too many eyewitnesses who say they saw the Sukharov plane literally buzzing the airliner. And it's also very funny that the airliner was ordered to drop 10,000 feet minutes before it was attacked.
So what's going on here? You think it's the NATO being quite aggressive then?
I think NATO's being very aggressive, and I think it needs to stop and back away now, because America's in 174 countries in the world, and it's in another 27 countries on top of that 174 with special forces doing black operations. It's heading... America has encircled Russia, basically. They said that the missile shield was to stop Iran launching missiles into Europe. Why would Iran want to launch missiles into Europe? I don't know. But so Russia has now challenged, okay, Iran is not going to do anything else. You need to take your missiles out. And the Americans are saying no.
What about other sentiments within the British forces about this? Because, I mean, surely, particularly after the lies to do with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the armed forces in Britain, the British Army, the Navy, the Air Force, are surely a little bit hesitant about whether to trust the politicians the next time, aren't they?
The senior ranks may be hesitant to trust the politicians. The junior ranks, they're there to do a job, and they'll do the job regardless. You'll get a few with a common conscience who will say, no, this is wrong. But the average feelings I get amongst people who are still in the army that I know is they see through it as a mockery, but there's not a lot they can do about it.
Doesn't that affect morale, your actual fighting ability?
It does, yes. Until somebody turns around and actually proves in black and white the fruitlessness of this and the deception of this, then they'll go where they're told to go.
Well, surely the fruitlessness...
They won't refuse to go into battle because that's obviously a criminal offence.
Isn't the fruitlessness caused by the problems back at home? Say, for example, massive cutbacks in the welfare bill, this sort of thing, and disabled people not being looked after anymore so well.
Well, I don't think soldiers really think of that sort of thing. They notice cutbacks when it starts to affect their equipment, when it starts to affect their combat pay, when it starts to affect their medical treatment. If they're wounded or injured, then they start to think, well, this is not right. We're fighting and we're not getting looked after. Which you're beginning to hear from a few of the vets who have come back pretty messed up from various wars, like Iraq, and they're not getting the treatment they should get.
Old Labour Oxford economist Martin Summers pointing at the microphone here. I think he wants to get a word in. Martin.
Hi there. I've listened to everything you've been saying, and in actual fact, the sort of things you've been saying are the kind of things that we've been covering on this show for years. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing you've said which is in any way shocking to us or to most of our audience. The question I'm really asking you is, what you said earlier, that if you refuse to go into battle, you'd be breaking the law or whatever. But what we're dealing with here is high-level criminality right to the top in the Western setup. And you, of course, have, from personal experience, have outlined various aspects of that criminality. Now, I would argue that the role of the police and the military in those circumstances is to have a plan to deal with the criminals that are carrying out these criminal acts. Otherwise, somebody else will start making a plan, and then you've got the potential terrorist opposition emerging from the criminality of those in charge.
Well, I agree 100% with you, Martin, but it's not the military's job to police politicians. It's the police's job to police politicians. They're not above the law. Blair, forget the war criminal bit, which he obviously is a war criminal, because he took us into Iraq without the right legal procedures. But he's corrupt. And what I mentioned about the BAE was paying one of the Saudi princes, Prince Salman, I think it was, $30 million a year for a bribe, because the Saudis gave us the biggest air or fighter jet contract ever. So we were bribing like heck, and when the police got involved on the investigation, they were told leave it alone by Blair. Now, Prime Minister should not be allowed to interfere with the lawful investigation by the police services.
That should be the principle. I mean, in Italy, Imposimato, as the head of the Supreme Court, has pointed the finger at NATO intelligence services for carrying out various terrorist activities in Italy in the 70s and 80s. Gladio, indeed. Now, we on this show obviously are trying to educate the public about all of this, and I still suggest that the only way forward is for the police to step up, the civilian police, to step up to the mark and do the job. And then, of course, they can call upon the support of the military if they need it.
Yeah, to enforce the law, yes. But, I mean, what is going on in Parliament at the moment is a total disgrace. They've broken every one of their election promises. Very soon people are going to be getting bills for their National Health Service, which they're not going to be able to pay, so they're going to go bankrupt, and then the NHS is going to be seizing houses. And I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but we're going to end up with an American-style system.
Okay, final question then, John. What are we going to do about it?
I could get arrested for my answer. Well, the only thing we do is educate people, bring it forward, hit it forward.
And I think the other thing, obviously, is to back up both politicians and police when they're actually trying to pursue these corrupt people in power. Anyway, John Banks, you're a retired colonel. Were in the British Army for many years. Thanks very much for joining us on the Politics Show tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
You can listen again to any shows at bcfmradio.com and leave comments about your favourite programmes. BCFM 93.2, your interactive station 24 hours a day.